What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Today's video, we are back with another episode of Lions Latest, going through the latest Detroit Lions news. And today, we're going to be diving into the Lions coaching staff a little bit. Today, we're specifically going to be talking about one hiring that was announced today for the Detroit Lions, as well as multiple other coaches that are no longer being listed on their website. So let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to a video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, man, we are back with some more Detroit Lions news. Now, we're going to be diving into some draft stuff very, very soon here, okay? Trust me on that. I feel like I'm really getting into a good place now where we can really start to kind of dive into that, discuss it, talk a little bit about it. But that's what I've kind of been doing because, in my opinion, it's like, hey, this is the best time to really start to try to build up that foundation of draft knowledge before we get to the spot where it's like, hey, it's draft time. Okay, now let me figure it out, but also post content on it. That's going to be an absolute mess. So I'm doing my best to catch up in the background. You all know that. But today we did have some news, and I'm trying not to make this super long, but as you know, these videos usually turn out extremely long. So I'm going to kind of fly through the coaches that are no longer being listed on the Lions website, seemingly saying that they are no longer coaching for the Detroit Lions. And the two other coaching hirings that were officially announced today, we've already discussed, like Terrell Williams. We've already dove into those. So those videos are up if you want to take a look. Today, we're going to be specifically diving into Jim O'Neill, who has been hired as a defensive assistant for the Lions. But we'll get to that in a second. Let's start with some of the coaches that are no longer being listed or have been removed from the site, seemingly saying that they are no longer coaching with the Lions. First off, of course, we have Brian Duker. He has moved on to the Miami Dolphins to be their secondary coach / pass game coordinator. Makes a ton of sense. Specifically, was working with our safeties first. Did an excellent job. We have a super strong safety room, so this makes a ton of sense that there would be interest from Brian Duker. We know the Detroit Lions essentially, in a way, kind of already filled out this position with their most recent hiring. We also have John Fox, who was our senior defensive assistant. One thing I'll say to that, while Jim O'Neill, who we're going to talk about today, is being listed as defensive assistant, maybe he's kind of going to handle a similar type of role. That's kind of what it seems like here. Also, Jim O'Neill has been a senior defensive assistant before because he's been around. So I'm just assuming that maybe that's going to be a similar position. Also, Wayne Blair, our defensive quality control coach. John Scott Jr., who was our defensive line coach this past season, but as we've already touched on, Terrell Williams, our new defensive line coach from the Tennessee Titans. Dre Bly, our cornerback coach. Now, what's key about this specifically is, like I just said, Brian Duker left, and we have a new defensive backs coach in the mix, DeShea. Again, hopefully I'm saying his name right. However, we now no longer seemingly have that cornerback coach, and I thought that was kind of where his specialty was. So it's not to say the Lions have to fill that out. You don't necessarily have to fill out all these positions. We've seen before there's certain positions that teams just don't carry. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But it's just something to kind of keep an eye on there. Dre Bly got his shot with the Lions. The cornerback position was, I don't think, up to par for the Lions where they felt like it should be at. But also, I think they also want to get the development going because Cam Sutton, going into his second year of this contract, seems like they're going to make a pretty legitimate addition somewhere, free agency draft, somewhere they're going to invest in a young cornerback here, maybe multiple, and that's a key position. In our last video, we talked about our coach for that positional group that the Lions recently hired in DeShea. That was the guy that I thought especially was at that cornerback position and getting development, especially out of young players. And then finally, we have Jim Holster, a senior offensive assistant that has been removed. Wishing the best for all of these guys, as always, man. If they're looking to land another position, maybe they're not, maybe guys like, I don't know, John Fox aren't necessarily looking for that, but wishing the best, man. You hate to see this. Plus, guys like Brian Duker are getting other opportunities just elsewhere, and that just makes a ton of sense. He did a great job, so credit to him, man. Rooting for all of those guys going forward. With that now, again, I don't want to spend a ton of time here, so let's dive right into it. Jim O'Neill. I did want to hop in and just give you guys this little message, man. Of course, click that top link in the description because BetUS is offering an awesome promotion right now where you can get a 125% match on your first 3 deposits using code JOIN125, the number 125, man. It is an amazing deal that they are offering right now. JOIN125. And of course, I always point out, like, hey, all the sporting options, all of those things on the left. But, man, we got to address something right away here. As you can see, we got next season Super Bowl odds out now. And I got to be honest with you, this Jared Goff one is speaking to me. Plus 4,000. Here's why. First off, 16. Coincidence? I'm just saying. Look. Number 16 at number 16. And here's the thing, like, there's multiple guys tied at plus 4,000. As you can see, they're just sending me a message right now. Great customer support, by the way. So if you do sign up, you get involved in their loyalty program, 24/7 communication. And as you can see, man, they're going to try to make sure that you don't miss out on any kind of perks. But plus 4,000. There's multiple players with plus 4,000. Multiple, but they chose to put Goff at 16. That speaks to me a little bit. I love this one personally. As you can see, if you click on it over here, it moves it over to your bet slip. You can move it over to your bet slip, and at plus 4,000, let's say, for example, I wanted to drop $25 on that, and Goff does his thing. At one point, there was MVP conversations this year, so it's not crazy. I actually love this bet. $25 could win you $1,000. So let's confirm that. Let's get that thing locked in. $25, and you can see the return there, $1,000 if this hits next season. I think this is very possible. So again, click that top link, man, if you want to get involved to it, man. This is the best way to get started, man. They hook you up over here, and they have a great deal right now. And as you can see at the top, they have tons of other options as well between casino games, racebook, promotions, all of those things, as well as other sports. So if you maybe want to dabble in some of the basketball, because that's what's popping right now, go check that out. But if it's your first time, man, just sign up. Just sign up, check it out. Who has been hired as the Lions' defensive assistant. Now, I'm quickly going to kind of show this graphic of where Jim O'Neil has coached and where he's worked in the past. And you can see the guy has coached at a lot of different places, okay, in a lot of different roles. It started off on the offensive side of the ball before transitioning into the grad assistant role in 2003 and 2004. Then he was back at Towson, where he went to college as a defensive coordinator / defensive backs coach. I think that's sort of key because we kind of see that pop up a little bit more. Of course, he's been a defensive coordinator multiple times, but also working specifically with the defensive backs. We saw a lot of that. Then safeties coach at Eastern Michigan, defensive quality control coach, then in the NFL. And I think what's key about this is, as you can see, a year in, then became the assistant defensive backs coach for the New York Jets. And if you go back to that time with the Jets, 2009 specifically, they went to the AFC Championship game that season. They had a great season that year. Then moved on to the Buffalo Bills, and there he was their linebacker coach. Now, what's interesting about this one is we know a lot of this comes down to connections. Here was Mike Penton was working with the Buffalo Bills, and he stepped in as their linebacker coach at that time, and he essentially followed him over to the Cleveland Browns when Mike Penton went over to the Cleveland Browns in 2014 and 2015, and he became their defensive coordinator for that time span. Then off to the San Francisco 49ers as their defensive coordinator. Now, I will say this, all right, it hasn't all been perfect. And I haven't dove into everything in terms of every stop. I look at some of the numbers. We'll talk about some of the schematic stuff. But with the Cleveland Browns, definitely didn't end extremely well, seemingly. All right, there was some criticism, talking about how it's an execution league and the statistics, and we'll take a look at those in a second there. Then defense coordinator for a season with San Fran. They went 2-14. Then he was relieved with Chip Kelly. That was a disaster of a season regardless, so don't put it all on him as the defensive coordinator, but that was just a bad season overall for that organization. Took a year off, came back as a senior defensive assistant, so he's done that before with the Oakland Raiders, and I think what really stands out there is he went from senior defensive assistant to all of a sudden, hey, you're the defensive backs coach now for a couple of seasons with the Raiders, and that was under John Gruden. And in that time, worked with not the best room of defensive backs. Again, as we touched on the last couple of videos, that's a key. You can't just look at the numbers and be like, oh, he's terrible, or oh my goodness, this guy's incredible. Because if you do that, like with the Jets time, when you could see oh, the passing yards were first, well, what personnel is he working with? That's a huge factor in all of this. And it's way easier when you're a fan of that team and you're going through it and you can see the development. You're like, oh, that guy's got to be doing something there. Like Brian Duker, for example, did 2 seasons defensive backs coach with the Oakland / Las Vegas Raiders at that time. Worked with them young corners, as we'll talk about. Then teamed up with Pat Fitzgerald at the college football level, became a defensive coordinator for a couple of seasons. Statistically, it kind of took a nosedive over there with Northwestern. Definitely was not the best, but I took some notes from the schematic side. Again, year off, and now here he is with the Detroit Lions as their defensive assistant. So he's definitely been around, all right? That is one thing that we could say. This guy has coached at a lot of places, and I don't want to go into every place that he's coached because there's just a ton there, but I do want to start here first, and the reason I want to start here is because this is one of those overlooked things that kind of hit me late. And I'm like, this feels important. Here's why. So first thing I started doing, well, not first thing, but after getting all the numbers down, I was like, okay, let me take a look at some of the stops that he's been at. Most recently, Northwestern. What the heck did that defense look like? And of course, I'm watching that schematically, and you see some of the things that stand out. A lot of quarters, a lot of cover three blitz. I'm seeing all the safety movement. Safeties are very involved, run defensively as well. But one thing that stood out immediately was like, man, the linebacker play seems to be kind of on point here. Okay, we'll look at the numbers, but the linebacker play seems to be pretty good. And once I did that, it hit me. I'm like, wait a minute, he was a linebacker coach at one point. So let me pull it back. And you go back to 2013, that single season with the Buffalo Bills as their linebacker coach. And what you notice is that the group of guys that he'd worked with, a rookie in Kiko Alonso, and a guy like Lawson as a free agent on a multi-year deal to kind of play their hybrid Sam linebacker in that front, and then also Moats, they had a I would say one of the best probably linebacker rooms in the league just that season alone. As you can see on the right side here, you can see some of the production that those three guys posted, right, in all of their roles specifically. So that's actually the one position that I'm very intrigued by, and I will say this, just been going back, watching some of that 2013 season. Like I said, Mike Penton made it clear, like, hey, we're going to be a hybrid 3-4, 4-3 front, which in ways I think you could argue that the Lions have been. Now, we've seen different looks. They had a very big nose tackle at the time, which was a big part of that defense. They played their 3 technique where they could kind of play that one gapping role a lot of times. Makes you think of Aleem McNeil, but there's other guys that can kind of play that role too, and it's not like they played the same front every single time. They mixed from tight fronts. They mixed it around, and then they also had, kind of your big D end as well. Now, theirs was massive. We don't necessarily have that piece, but they had their big D end. It was a different league then, a lot of 5-man fronts, but then again, they also brought in kind of that hybrid piece, that Sam backer, and that was a key element for that defense. Schematically speaking, okay, you can see kind of the similarities there when you watch that. And by the way, just a side note, just to kind of throw this out there, like, it definitely crossed my mind when just watching some of those, like, because today I was watching more draft prospects, went through like 3 or 4, and one guy, Kiko Alonso, man, I couldn't help but just get some flashes and some vibes of a guy that's coming out in this year's draft, Peyton Wilson out of NC State. Like, he just kind of like popped him up. I'm like, these kind of look similar. Height, weight, they actually measure out pretty similar outside of really length. So I don't know. I'm not saying that Lions are going to go draft this guy, but again, like I said, this year I'm not trying to overlook anybody, but the flexibility inside outside, I was like, this guy kind of reminds me of him. So just a quick little side note there. But I do think the linebacker position, working with a rookie linebacker Alonso, putting up one of the best, a fantastic season for him individually. They did really nice jobs also protecting him at the second level, as well as that wasn't always necessarily his strength, right, by dealing with some of the big defensive linemen in front of him, a couple of 2-gappers, allowed him to play a little bit of free, rack up a ton of tackles, but it was a rookie at the time. Of course, we have Jack Campbell, and then again, kind of that Sam backer, maybe like our Derek Barnes or James Houston, or potentially a new addition to that mix this next season. Now, when we look at what he's done as a defensive coordinator. We'll start first in 2014, and this is working with the Cleveland Browns, and this was essentially his first stop as a defensive coordinator, definitely in the NFL. Again, he did it in the past at the college level, but in the NFL. Now, you could just look at the numbers, and you could see that, okay, statistically, not great. Now, one thing that did improve, I guess, was pass defense. That definitely improved, especially in the first season. It was one of the best, seemingly, in football, as well as third down defense and red zone defense, and honestly, in comparison to the year before he got there, to when he left, third down defense was still better, red zone defense was still better, pass defense, yeah, not necessarily better, pretty bad actually. It kind of took a step back. The run defense, probably the most concerning thing. It's kind of everywhere I look, the run defense has not been like fantastic. Okay, just something to kind of point out. Positive is the Lions run defense has been really good, so if there's any concern there, that's been a real positive. Moving on to his next stop, and this would be with the San Francisco 49ers, and again, a really rough year in 2016. It was only a 1-year sample size, and you could see he stepped in. It was pretty much a nightmare. The stats across the board are pretty bad across the board. Outside of completion percentage allowed, nothing's really that good here. Okay, pass rating, I guess, remained similar. It actually got better. It just ranked a little bit worse. Run defense got a lot worse, as we talked about. One thing I definitely want to look at is with the Raiders, because this is where he was the defensive backs coach after being a senior defensive assistant, and I had to look at some players individually. Now, you could also see that in this time, 2019 to just 2020, there was some improvement statistically as a defense. Touchdowns went down, interception went up by 1, completion percentage improved. Like, you could see the numbers improve really outside of yards per game. Pass rating dropped down, so there was improvement statistically. We know so many factors also play into this, like, can you create pressure? One thing I thought was interesting is that this was not like a heavy blitzing team. It was not like a super aggressive team. I mean, they were near the bottom of the league the first season, like 31st. Next season, they were below half in blitz percentage. So they were not like a freakishly aggressive defense, though, again, we'll kind of touch on that a little bit more here in a second. However, you look at some of the individuals that they were working with in the back end. We know that's always a key there. You had a guy like Trayvon Mullen, rookie Trayvon Mullen out of Clemson. You see he had a strong rookie season. Then he followed it up in his second year with another pretty strong season. Went from 1 to 2 interceptions defensively. defensively and what really stands out here, like guys like Nevin Lawson, for example. Nevin Lawson had one of the best seasons, honestly, maybe of his career in 2019, especially when you look at some of the advanced metrics behind that. So had a guy like Abram, another very young player that he had in 2020 that didn't really play much in 2019 in his first season. Maybe didn't have the best season in 2020, but another young player. They had Arnett as well. Remember that first round pick? It kind of surprised some people. That was his last season in 2020. So it was a all over the place kind of room, that's for sure. But one thing also that is for sure is that while you had some vets mixed in, like, you talk about Joyner and all of a sudden he moves to linebacker, or a guy like Worley, who a long cornerback as well, that at 24 years old, again, had a really strong season in his first year. It seemed like he had got some really good production out of these guys specifically. And one thing that I took away when just watching just a little bit is immediate. It was like, oh, okay, this is a tackling unit. That is for sure. And you still saw, the quarters coverage. You saw the safety movement. You saw the one-on-one coverage on the outside, but one thing that stood out was like, dude, these guys will tackle. So I know that that's going to carry over with Jim O'Neill. I know that that's something that he's probably going to pride himself on. And then, of course, with Northwestern. Now, it improved the second year around, took an absolute drop off. Again, a lot of this is recruiting as well. In his first season, statistically, they were pretty much just terrible everywhere outside of just touchdown percentage allowed. Everything was pretty much awful in comparison to the year before. 2022, some things got back on track a little bit, specifically passing yards per game. Pushed it up to number 13. And we know he has a lot of experience working with defensive backs. Completion percentage got back in check. So things kind of stabilized, and I think that's also a key to point to, is when things can kind of stabilize. Now, with that being said, if the organization is not stabilized, everything becomes messy. So there's so much that goes into that, but I always like to look at what they do individually. And to me, that's where I focus on that Buffalo Bills tenure when he was a linebacker coach, because it's so easy to point to that. Time, they set a franchise high at 57 sacks. It was second in the league that year. When you take a look at kind of the background, the hybrid fronts that he was a part of, you got your weak side defensive end like the Hutchinson for me, for example. You have the Sam backer. You have the nose tackle like a Broderick Martin. You have the, three technique that can go win. You get a lot of different front looks. Of course, there's so much variety in that, but you can see how personnel can kind of match up a little bit. Some of the, big VNs that the Lions carry, Josh Paschal, John Kaminsky as well in that mix. And then the off-ball linebacker position, having a young guy like Jack Campbell to their Kiko Alonso, and they protected him. From what I've watched, Jim O'Neill feels like he aligns up in just terms of how stylistically the Lions like to play defensively. You see the aggressiveness, the safety play aggressiveness, the rolling safeties, the single high safety, as well as the half turn, off coverage looks, a lot of zone coverage defensively, and then just technically how they play with their cornerbacks defensively. What stands out is that the development there for the linebacker position, the fit schematically, the stylistic similarities to specifically when he was with Northwestern, the blitzing out of cover 3 looks to zone blitzing, the cover 3, the rolling safeties, the quarters coverage, a lot of zone coverage defensively, and then on third downs, the aggressiveness, the intensity. It was cover 0. It was, just a lot of Tampa 2, which we love to do as well, but it was a lot of variety there, but it was real aggressiveness when he got teams, especially in kind of those third and medium spots, which reminded me so much of what Aaron Glenn likes to do as well here. But it's always the zone blitzing that stands out. That's always what stands out when I look at how coaches could compare and how they could fit here with Aaron Glenn. So I think there's actually a lot of things when you kind of dive into this that makes sense, like stylistically, like, okay, this does make sense. I think when you're hiring a defensive assistant, it's more of the schematic background. It's more of the understanding of playing in different philosophies and how you want to adjust things defensively to kind of personnel that you have, rather than just what has he done statistically to earn this type of job, right? This guy's been around before, and you can look at it. Really, just all the organizations he's been part of, it's been kind of a mess, right? San Francisco, the kind of transition period they were in from a guy like Jim Harbaugh to Kyle Shanahan. He's just been a part of a lot of messy situations. He wasn't able to consistently stay in one spot, but a guy like Mike Penton kind of carrying him around, sticking with him in different places, and then still being able to get different job opportunities and work his way up as fast as he did from offense to defensive side of the ball. I think those kind of things do stand out, as well as the individual development and the young players that he's worked with. Had experience probably in a similar role to what he's going to do now, and it seems like the Lions are in a way maybe just replacing a little bit of John Fox here. And for the Lions here, they're just going to bounce. He's not a head coach, or so they're going to bounce ideas off him, I'm assuming, as well, be able to learn any pointers that they can pick up from him, anything that he knows from the past, and maybe just, stylistically how they feel like they can get the best out of some of these players that they have. Your latest update. I'm going to leave right there, man. Try to be short and sweet with this, quick to the point. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and trust me, we'll be back very soon, hopefully this weekend with some sort of draft video, hopefully a mock draft. Thank you, Pride, for watching, and I'm out.